Accidentally tipped over and put on my back, and my dad wrapped me up in a blanket. With my mom, they, in a panic, drove me to the nearest hospital, which was Wheeler Hospital in Gilroy. You know, it was a white hospital in 1941. And so here's this Mexican kid being brought in by obviously migrant farm workers, and the nurses opened up the blanket, and all the skin on my back fell off and part of my face. And so my mother was convinced that I was dying. She had lost my brother before me. I had a second brother. And, it's 1941. Today I'd be in ICU. I've been in intensive care, a burn unit. But then, I mean, it was difficult for this little white hospital in a small rural town to know what to do. So they put some kind of salve on my back and released me into the care of my mother, who took me back to the farmer's barn where we were living. In those days, they took the horses out, put the Mexicans in. It was fair exchange. I've always believed that a negative can be turned into a positive, and it turns out that was the biggest positive negative of my early life. I was barely one, because for the next 6 months, I slept on my young mother's stomach. She was deathly afraid that I was going to die like the brother before me, so she slept with me like that for 6 months. While my back healed, when I got skin on my face. I was 1 year old. I healed quickly, especially with my mother's love. But the fact is that I was heart to heart with my mother. I was close to my lunch too, and breakfast right there. You know? I was breastfed until I was 2. You know, so. But the fact is, the negative of this violent burn that experience that I had was converted into the greatest positive, because for those 6 months, I slept heart to heart with my mother, and I think that contact empowered me, even though I was only 1 year old. That, and the fact that the boiling water that fell on my back hit me in the lumbar region, where the small of my back, and I think that activated not just my spine but my whole system, and so I was ready to go. You know, once I healed, it kept me going. And so that's important to note, that a negative can be turned into a positive. In 1940, California was a very different place. It was populated by approximately 6 million people. Among them, 750,000 were Latinos, most of them Mexican Americans, 120,000 Japanese Americans, maybe 100,000 Chinese, even fewer African Americans, and all the way down to the tiniest little minorities, the Native Americans that had survived the Holocaust of the 19th century. It was a white country. It was a white state. Now we are pushing past 40 million, heading within 20 years to 50 million, and we are the most diverse state in the nation. A nation that is becoming increasingly diverse, increasingly reflective of the many faces of humanity. And I think it is really important to emphasize that regardless of what is happening today, the wave of history is with us. The wave of change in America is with us. And those of us that have lived as long as I have, I'm 76, have witnessed the transformation of our United States of America into a country that respects all races, all creeds, all religions. I say that as a social activist. I say that as someone with thousands of people, millions, have put his body on the line in order to defend the most basic and sacred principles of our American republic. We are Americans. There is no question about that. But there are people that would deny, some of our people, some of the non-white people, let's face it, deny them that privilege, that honor of being Americans. And so, as an activist, I want to emphasize to the very young, I can't see you, it's really dark out there today, that you have a sacred duty. Just as we felt that duty back in the 1960s, to defend what is best about America, the promise of this republic, and the promise of this democracy to be just and to be complete and honorable to all. I'm a little bit freaked these days because we are essentially at war. I happen to believe that because of the Russian intrusion into our national election, we have been co-opted by another country. Where are the echoes that I used to hear back in the 40s and the 50s against Russian encroachments on our democracy and our freedom? Where are the cries of outrage against the forces that are trying to undermine our electoral process? Television has become a little bit unwatchable, but we see this steady drift. Now, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. The Nazis were there in the 40s. But before that, the United States of America went through a whole period. Let's be honest about it. It was a country, a nation that was created through black slavery. They enslaved all the children of Africa and used them for brute labor. And as a Mexican-American, origins in migrant labor, I know what it is to be a wage slave and to be in a country that uses really people of color for brute labor, or uses immigrants in general. Italians and Polish people built the subways in New York with brute labor because they were immigrants, because that's been the tradition in this country, that we exploit immigrants until they become Americans, and then they begin to exploit others too. The fact is that our country has been an uninterrupted history of ups and downs, but I believe in the wave of history. I believe with Martin Luther King that eventually the curve of the universe, the curve bends towards social justice, because we exist with something in us that cannot be denied, and that is the light. I want you all for a moment, and I mentioned the 22nd of November. I was 22. I was 22 when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. 2 years before that, I had worked on the Viva Kennedy campaign in San Jose. I did precinct work. And I was amazed when the candidate came to visit us there in downtown San Jose at the Civic Auditorium. And we presented him, and he spoke to us. And I was a member of MAPA, the Mexican American Political Association. I was the young guys, 20-year-old, working with a lot of older U.S. World War II veterans, to preserve our democracy and to make it real by working precincts and getting people out to vote. And so we were overjoyed when Senator John F. Kennedy came to San Jose, and he spoke to us, and we gathered for the big picture, and then we presented him with a big black Mexican sombrero with sequins, And he took it gladly, and we urged him, put it on. He said, no, I'm going to save it. He says, this is very special. I'm going to save it and wear it in New York for the St. Patrick's Day parade, Of course, that's just political, political cunning, really. He never put on the hat. But nevertheless, we were very pleased with his joke. And of course, I was overjoyed with so many people, so many professors from San Jose State where I was attending, that our candidate had won the U.S. presidency. And of course, ushered the Kennedy administration came in with a lot of energy. Robert Kennedy was leading 50-mile hikes. It was an amazing, uplifting period. Tragically, 3 years later, he was assassinated. And that completely changed my view of the world. And then later, when we began to hear that there were perhaps rumors that people within the government had possibly participated in a conspiracy, and those rumors came very quickly there on campus, I began to question my own Americanness. What am I going to do with this? How can I deal with this? But mostly, I felt anger. I felt disappointment. I felt rage. And this ball of hatred began to grow in my chest. I'm much older now, and I understand that anger can propel you, as anger propels so many Americans. And I realized then people were similarly angered when Barack Obama, our first black American president, was elected, our first African American president was elected. And they felt that ball of anger. But that anger really takes you nowhere. It takes you into a dead-end street. And so I want to ask you to imagine something. Imagine a light, because I wrote an entry into my journal back then in 1922, when I was 22, in 1962, 63, that resonates now, and I still have the journal. One night I sat down and wrote, very simply, that there is a light at the center of everything. And from that light, there are an infinite number of emanations that come up. And just as it has been recently discovered that light is both a wave and a particle, this light is both a wave and a particle, millions of infinitesimal particles, and that's us. But they're all part of the same wave. They are the wave. And just as the quality of light has been investigated by physics, our modern, most advanced scientific techniques, and have discovered that it's both particle and wave, so too the human race emerging from this light. All living beings are both particle and wave. And we think that we're individuals. We look around and we say, oh, well, I'm better than that guy, or I'm richer than that guy, I'm holier than thou, you know. But actually, we're all the one and the same. We are the same being. Call it God, call it the force, call it what you will, call it the light. That light manifests itself endlessly in infinitesimal and infinite forms. Infinite, macro, micro, macro, micro. And we are like that. The 3 to 4 billion people on Earth are all emanations of the same light. There is no difference between me and you. I subscribe to the ancient Mayan belief of Inlak Ech. You are my other me. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. That's the answer to all racists. There is no race but the human race. There is no single religion. There is one God that unites us all, or no God at all. There's no difference between Islam and Christianity and Shintoism and the much maligned religion of our pre-Columbian ancestors. You can no longer be a Mayan religious person because all of that was wiped out 500 years ago. You can be a Catholic. You're allowed to be a Catholic if you're Mexican. But to be a Mayan or be an Aztec, you can't do because now you're guilty of human sacrifice. And yet humanity has been practicing human sacrifice since time immemorial. Mm-hmm. The sacrifice of John F. Kennedy gave us the Civil Rights Voting Act, believe it or not. He would have had trouble ramming it through Congress. But with his death, LBJ was able to do it. With the Depression and all of the suffering that act engendered, we were able to get Social Security, we were able to get all kinds of protections that other people have been trying to dismantle ever since, and even in our own time. The social contract that we have created out of the suffering and struggle and deaths of millions of people is something that is sacred and must be maintained from generation to generation. Injustice grows like weeds. You can weed the garden, you can clean out all the weeds, but you can be damn sure that the next day the weeds will be back. And these weeds that we're seeing growing today in our American garden are absolutely fatal. They're lethal. Because, the weeds, they grew in Nazi Germany back in the 1930s. Now, it is astonishing to see Americans doing this. Astonishing. Where is our courage? Are we going to round up Muslims and put them in concentration camps like they did with Japanese Americans? Where the hell is our country going? It cannot go there. It cannot go there. Because that is a violation of the most basic and universal principles that have made our country great. And the principle of being American, of standing up for the Constitution, is something that is not determined by the color of your skin, the slant of your eyes, the quality of your hair. The promise of America is it applies to everybody, regardless of how you look, regardless of where you come from, where your ancestors have come from. If we can agree to the same social contract, then we have a country that we can be proud of. The moment that our basic, most fundamental principles are violated, then we're in trouble. And so I subscribe and I give you this message, and especially to the very young, because I think that the activism of my life is now going on to even higher gear. I can't believe it, I can't believe it. And all of my contemporaries perhaps are a little bit tired. We fought the Vietnam War to a standstill. We fought civil rights to get rights we fought for LGBTQ rights. We fought for women's rights. Like many of you, I was sincerely hoping that we would have our woman president this year, that we would have finally a woman sitting in the White House as our leader, acknowledging the equality of women, because gender is not another distinction that determines the quality of a human being. Gender is a fact of life, and it only emphasizes the equality of all human beings, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman. It wasn't until I was 40 years old that I realized that I'm a woman too. And my wife and companion, Lupe Trujillo Valdez, who've been married for 47 years, had a lot to do with letting me know that I was a woman. And the fact is that all of the issues that we have engendered in my lifetime are still with us, but they are now endangered. They're endangered by hypocrisy. They are endangered by greed. They are endangered by the distortion of truth. And so, what is the response? I think what it brings to a university campus is the sacred responsibility of defending the truth. That our institutions of higher learning must be bastions of truth and freedom. That we must maintain the power to express our ideas, to retain a free press, which is becoming increasingly difficult because of the denigration by our president-elect. How can he do this? He can do this because we allow it to happen. We're all part of the light. We're all part of the same light. And many people do not realize that we're part of the same consciousness. The world comes and goes. History rises and falls. But if you create a monster, it will come to your door. And I'm afraid that we have created a monster. We have created a monster that is now at our very doorstep. And that the only way to keep that monster from becoming absolutely fatal to the country is by continuing to exercise our freedoms as Americans. You know, I remember when this was Fort Ord. In 1995, when I became one of the 13 founding professors of this campus, it was a privilege and an honor for me to participate in the turning of this military camp into a university, the conversion of this camp, to turn swords and rifles into plowshares, to make this an institution of higher learning, not to denigrate the many soldiers that have come through here since the turn of the century, the 20th century, but to honor them because they fought for our freedoms, and we are exercising that freedom by educating our young. This university was created in order to service this part of the country, the whole Salinas Valley. We have a mass of people coming and continuing to work in the fields. But that shouldn't be their eternal destiny. They should be able to do that and earn enough to be able to pay the rent, feed their children, and send their kids to higher ed. And that's the idea. And what is that higher ed? It is a realization of the principles and the values of this country. This is something that should have been taught to all our Americans. I don't know what people were thinking when they saw this candidate appear who was violating every principle that we've ever been taught to respect. But I suppose it has something to do with racism. Okay, that's an old evil. It's been there from the very beginning. And yes, there were black slaves, and there were Indians who were wiped out. They're being wiped out now at Standing Rock because they're fighting for their basic human rights for all of us. Water is life. Air is life. We need to protect our life. But this country has been, in the interest of progress and in the name of civilization, has been violating human rights for as long as it has existed. And it is only until righteous people began to speak the truth that we began to realize, okay, it's been a violent history. They've killed, I don't know how many American presidents. One in my lifetime, the presidential candidate, Bobby Kennedy, the great Martin Luther King, the great Malcolm X, so many people. And I was on the side of Cesar Chavez when they were trying to assassinate him on a number of occasions. One day in the middle of the great strike, they asked me, do you still want to go out? Because I was a picket captain. They said, because I said, why are you asking me? Of course I'm going to go out. I'm going to go out and picket. And they said, no, there's a rumor that there's someone with a high-powered rifle looking for you. I was told this by the longshoremen from San Francisco that were helping us. And I had to make a choice. And you know, I had objected to the war in Vietnam as an undeclared war that was unjust. Chicanos at that time were 6%, you know, of the population, and we were like 20% of casualties in Vietnam, together with African Americans who had similar statistics. And we said it's unjust that the people of color are the ones being put on the front lines to fight another people of color. So I opposed the war in Vietnam. But I decided to go and work with the United Farm Workers. So it wasn't the violence that scared me, because I figured, okay, if I did not go to Vietnam, it wasn't because I was afraid of bullets. As a man, I had to face up to my own fear of cowardice and say I would have faced it if that was the issue. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that our huge, powerful, beautiful country was oppressing this tiny little country for ideological reasons, and I wasn't going to be part of that. And so when it finally came time for me to make a decision whether I wanted to go out that day, when someone was aiming a high-powered rifle at my head, I said to myself, well, the same thing would have happened if you'd gone to Vietnam, so it's not an issue of fear of bullets. You got to be out there. So I went out there. Nothing happened. Obviously, I have a hole in my head. No, no, nothing happened. But I did have a grower's son point a gun at my head on the picket line when the Teatro Campesino was performing, and he said, go on and act. And that one stopped me. And I had to decide, is what I'm doing worth dying for? Is the act of doing theater for farm workers worth dying for? And I figured it was, because it had to do with speech. It had to do with free speech. It had to do with our ability to be able to express who we are. And I go back to that light that unites us all. Because we're all going to die. We're all mortal. And we're going to go back into that light. You're going to go back into that light. And that light is going to ask you, what have you done? What have you done to emphasize the unity of it all? Because this is what our lives are about. Consciousness, the growth of consciousness. But opposite to consciousness in our world is darkness. Opposite to our consciousness is ignorance and hatred. And we must oppose this vehemently. We must oppose this with all our heart. Because the heart, finally, is light. All our hearts are composed of, like E.T., you know, we're light. We're light at the very heart. And we have to embrace that light. Embrace it, because that is where we all come from, and that is what we all share. The heart. The heart is essential. I wrote a play called Valley of the Heart that was most recently performed on this stage. It was a beautiful experience for me to finally come back with one of my plays to CSUMB. This was the story of the Japanese-American internments, a love story between a Mexican-American sharecropper and the daughter of a Japanese-American farmer, a Issei, first-generation Japanese-American farmer. It was a love story in the middle of a period of hate and war, and I wanted to acknowledge what the Japanese Americans had gone through. I was honored when I was invited by the survivors of the Heart Mountain camp in Cody, Wyoming, to go there and address them this last summer. They have the 5th annual convocation. They built a massive interpretive center now. It's a museum, it's a gallery, it's a place where they receive visitors from all over the world to see what happened. It's on the 50 acres of the 434 acres originally that were once the Heart Mountain concentration camp. And that's just one of 10 camps. This was a camp that looked like the camps in Germany. The only difference was, and the inmates didn't know when they were going there, the internees did not know whether they were going to face execution or not. They were afraid maybe that's what was going to happen to them. But to lose your freedom is a terrible thing, and to lose your freedom in a place like that, buffalo country, but cold in the winter, absolutely miserable weather. And 120,000 Japanese Americans underwent that, and you know what? They did not come out hating their country. A good part of them, you know, joined the 442nd and went to die in Europe in defense of our country. That is an example that we can all emulate, that we must all emulate. And I share with my Mexican-American brothers and my Native American brothers the knowledge that this was once Mexico, but we don't hate the United States of America. We love the United States of America. We want its freedoms. But when those freedoms are denied to us, then we begin to wonder how wonderful is America. Well, it's as wonderful as we make it. It's as wonderful as our unity can concoct it. It is as wonderful as every conscience of every American makes it. And we need to emphasize our consciousness. We need to emphasize our conscience. This is the time for conscience. And it must happen on our campuses. I urge you, students of CSUMB, I urge you, faculty and administrators of CSUMB, keep the light burning here. Keep the fires of liberty burning here. We are in danger, but we're not going to do it with hate. We're going to do it with calm. We're going to do it with deliberation. We're going to do it with love for our country, and love for other Americans, and love for all of the people of the human race. God bless America, but God won't bless it unless we fight for it, and we stand up and make ourselves counted. You know, I was a proud member of the Chicano movement, but it's not just the Chicano movement. It hasn't been for a long, long time. I started out in the civil rights movement. I considered myself to be a black man, and so I said, I must join this movement. Nonviolent, I must join this movement. With the same energy and spirit that I joined Cesar Chavez to work for farm workers, in the same spirit that I have also marched over the years against unjust wars and also for women's rights, the ERA. I believe that all human beings must eventually earn their right to be who they are, to be complete. And so it comes back down to this campus. I'm proud that it's still here. I'm proud that we're continuing to bring young Chicanos and Chicanas, sons and daughters of migrant families, with everyone else to this campus. The African Americans that have settled in Seaside are an incredible part of our community. The Asian Americans that are here, the Italian Americans that were the fishing industry, all are Americans. We are all part of the same wave, and yet we are all individual quanta, we are all individual particles. And we may acknowledge our individuality, it makes us interesting, but above all, we must acknowledge our oneness, that we're all part of the same wave of history. And this wave will not retreat. This wave will not allow a madman to drag us into a violation and a betrayal of our most sacred American principles. I say this as an American, but I also say this as a descendant of the ancient inhabitants of this hemisphere. You may call us immigrants, if you will, the people that come to work in these valleys. The people that don't even speak Spanish, they come speaking Trique and Mixteca, they come from the depths of Mexico. But these are the ancient Americans. These are the descendants of people that have been here, like my ancestors, for 15 to 20 to 30,000 years, who knows? And yet, we believe in America. We believe in sharing this experience with all our brothers and sisters, because yes, ultimately we're all immigrants. The world is round, and there is no wall. If the Sierra Nevadas could not keep the covered wagons from getting here, no wall is going to keep the rest of America. The wall is only something that exists in somebody's mind who's blocking their own humanity. And so we must continue then to move forward. We must have heart. And I want to conclude with a poem in 3 languages, okay? In honor of the memory of John F. Kennedy, who strove to change this country, who prevented nuclear war from happening in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, who attempted to pull us out of Vietnam before the war really started, and who paid the most severe price that any president could pay, to be assassinated. He wasn't perfect. He was just a human being. But he was my hope when I was 22 years old and 23. And it was his death that launched me into a lifelong struggle of social activism. And if you're one of those young college students that's going through this now, I invite you and welcome you to the rest of your life. You have the 21st century to live up to. And I hope that the 21st century that you and your colleagues and your generation helps to create, and the generation that will come after you, that will grow out of you, will make America true to its dreams, the dreams of the forefathers, that this is for all of us, and the foremothers too. This is a dream that we must all share in common. And this dream even existed before Europe came to these shores. And it's a matter of heart. The way to the mind is through the heart. This is why I practice the arts. This is why I do theater. This is why I believe in storytelling, because we reach human beings through the heart. And we must continue to do that. The heart of light. And so this is the poem written by Prince Nezahualcóyotl, Prince of Texcoco, in 1482, 10 years before the coming of Columbus, in 3 languages. First in Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language. Tlei mashti kilnamikia kanma chinemyan moyolo ikti moyol susenmana awik patikwika ti moyol popoloa inflaltikpa kanma chtikla al tío. And now in Spanish. ¿Qué era lo que acaso tu mente hallaba? ¿Dónde andaba tu corazón? Por esto das tu corazón a cada cosa, sin rumbo lo llevas. Vas destrozando tu corazón sobre la tierra. ¿Acaso puedes ir en pos de algo? And now in English. What is it that your mind was looking for? Where is your heart? For this you give your heart to everything. You are destroying your heart. Your heart is without direction. On this earth, do you suppose that you can ever go in search of anything and find it? The message is, America, find your heart. Find your heart, America, and save yourself. Thank you.